I have a message for our military. Be ready.
Behind the scenes in the war on terror, another, far more clandestine war was being fought.
في بداية 2005 انتقلت إلى القاعدة.
We were authorized to use lethal force against Al-Qaeda.
In this secret war, both sides would make mistakes. Mistakes that would prove fatal. With exclusive testimony from both sides, this is the story of that war.
Everything changed. Nothing will ever be the same.
Nine 11 واقعا چې کله وشوه نو مونږ ته پته وه چې دا به کله کېږي نو مونږ په 9/11 خوشحالي ملاو کړې وه او مونږ د الله شکر ادا کړی چې د یو غټ ملک یو غټ معیشت هغې ته یو غټه دچکه ورسېده.
Al-Qaeda may well have celebrated on 9/11. Inside the United States' intelligence community, the reaction was entirely different. Shock.
What do we do? Meaning we, because we are the unit, we are the squad that's supposed to stop this.
This is what we were paid to do. We were paid to stop this from happening. And not only did it happen, but it happened on American soil, and it killed 3,000 people.
And that feeling of anger, of loss, was overwhelming.
Our grief has turned to anger, and anger to resolution. Whether we bring our enemies to justice or bring justice to our enemies, justice will be done.
Beyond the anger and the rhetoric, one thing was very clear.
This can never happen again, and we have to be the ones to ensure that it doesn't.
6 days after 9/11, George Bush signed a unique presidential finding granting unprecedented powers to the CIA.
It removed many of the restraints that previously had been there in terms of going after Al-Qaeda as an organization.
Legal authority to kill the Al-Qaeda leadership, and that's exactly what we set out to do.
For the United States, the gloves were coming off.
I can hear you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
The question was how to find the perpetrators.
It's uniquely difficult to hunt a terrorist group. You're looking for a handful of individuals. You're looking for weapons that are very small. The whole nature of the intelligence target changes.
The answer for the CIA was to focus on the unique nature of the attacks themselves. Cell phones, satellite phones, the internet. On September the 11th, Al-Qaeda had hijacked the instruments of globalization and turned them against their inventors. If the United States was to respond effectively, it would have to infiltrate the terrorists' main strength, their use of communications technology.
You're always looking for vulnerabilities in an organization to see if you can get to their leadership. For them to run the organization, they've got to talk to each other. How do they do it, and how do we get in?
The CIA had had a degree of success monitoring Al-Qaeda's communications in the years prior to 9/11.
In 93, in 94, 95, Al-Qaeda, including bin Laden, was very much on the learning curve. They were new to this, so they used communications devices perhaps less carefully than they should have.
It became apparent to us that he represented the kind of direct threat to us that other terrorist groups might not have.
In November 1996, the US National Security Agency received a tip. Bin Laden was using a new satellite telephone. The NSA traced the phone's number to its ultimate destination, Kandahar, Afghanistan.
It was very helpful in targeting, or at least locating, different cells of al-Qaeda around the world. But he was very careful about what he said on it.
So careful that US intelligence was to remain in the dark regarding plans for bin Laden's most ambitious attack yet. On August the 7th, 1998, Al-Qaeda struck US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Hundreds were killed, thousands injured. For the NSA, there was another crucial casualty, its access to Al-Qaeda.
The fact that we were following Osama bin Laden because he was using a certain type of telephone made it into the press as a result of a leak. And guess what happened? Osama bin Laden changed his behavior.
Phone went dead. Phone went dead. That was the singular most stupid thing for anybody to do or say, to talk about that.
Al-Qaeda had learned an important lesson. It now started instructing its operatives how to stop the Americans from monitoring their calls.
A telephone can be a fighter's most dangerous weapon, but used incorrectly, it can get you killed.
And from then on, the communications of al-Qaeda was much more difficult to collect.
Never reveal your true name. Always use your code name.
But for the CIA, there was an unexpected boon. 2 days after the bombing, Kenyan authorities picked up a suspect in Nairobi.
Daoud Rashid Aulali was an operative, a suicide bomber that didn't die, who basically chickened out and ran.
Confronted by the FBI, Al-Awali immediately caved in and answered one key question.
What'd you do that day? After the bomb, what'd you do? Did you call anybody? Oh yeah, I called this number. What's the number?
The NSA traced Al-Awali's number to Sana'a, Yemen, and a long-time Al-Qaeda suspect, Ahmed al-Hada. Hada was the gatekeeper for Al-Qaeda's communication system. His house was the switchboard.
It's like terrorists calling Central. It's your central hub of communications. It's calling home. It's calling base.
US intelligence immediately tapped the house's phone lines and discovered two unusually frequent callers. The first was a young Palestinian, Abu Zubaydah.
Abu Zubaydah was a very important person, not a fighter or a bomber, but someone who was running logistical affairs for several training camps in Afghanistan.
The second caller was a more mysterious character, known only as Mukhtar.
We had no idea what Mukhtar was. Use of code names makes the trail go a little astray, makes investigation that much more difficult.
The caller's code name was itself a clue. Mukhtar, the brain in Arabic, was the head of Al-Qaeda's operational planning unit. 2 years later, US intelligence's failure to identify or locate him was to have apocalyptic consequences.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible.
Punishing those responsible was to prove easier said than done. The CIA knew that their main target was in Afghanistan, but had no idea where. His Afghan hosts, the Taliban, now found themselves in the firing line.
Deliver to United States authorities all the leaders of Al-Qaeda who hide in your land.
It was through Pakistan that we were dealing, trying to resolve this issue of Osama bin Laden being in Afghanistan. We were dealing with Mullah Umar, and we were telling him to hand over or to send him out of the area.
If there is no evidence and proof given to us that we will not be ready to give Osama bin Laden without any proof.
With the likelihood of a deal with the Taliban diminishing, America now went firmly on a war footing.
Pumped up, ready to get it on.
In secret, the CIA explored one last option for peace, contacting the number 2 in the Taliban leadership, Mullah Osmani.
I was trying to make it very clear to Mullah Osmani that the Americans were going to come, and that whatever else might happen, that this was going to be very bad for the Taliban movement.
The CIA made Osmani an extraordinary offer.
If Mullah Omar will not do what is required to save the country, it's up to you. I basically, talked him through the elements of a coup.
But Osmani wasn't buying it. And on October the 7th, time finally ran out.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
We used about 110 strike aircraft, including about 90 tactical aircraft launched from sea-based platforms.
In Jalalabad, the response to the onset of hostilities was immediate. The Al-Qaeda convoy moved southwest out of Jalalabad towards the border with Pakistan and the mountains of Tora Bora.
We think we know in general where bin Laden and some of his senior leadership are hiding. We think that's in this so-called Tora Bora area.
But getting him was going to prove harder than anyone expected. Bin Laden was not new to Tora Bora. In the 1980s, he and the Afghan Mujahideen had fought the Soviets there. The Tora Bora Mountains were not ideal terrain for the Americans to operate in.
These are very forbidding peaks. The passes through them are typically, at a minimum, 12,000 feet to 18,000 feet. Very, very difficult terrain indeed.
And Al-Qaeda held the high ground. US aircraft bombed the mountains relentlessly.
There is a psychological effect of having ammunition of 15,000 pounds of explosive capability that's brought into a very narrowly defined area. The reverberation effect that goes up in those caves should have some kind of a negative effect. The other...
But here, the US faced a dilemma. The Pentagon afraid of getting bogged down in Afghanistan, refused to deploy large numbers of US troops on the ground. Most of the fighting in Tora Bora would have to be done by someone else. Afghans. To Pentagon chiefs, Afghan ex-Mujahideen were the perfect choice to hunt bin Laden. Not only were they battle-hardened fighters, they knew the terrain inside out. From the outset, the CIA thought this was a serious mistake. In their view, Afghan warlords were less than professional. Some were highly untrustworthy.
One of them turned out to be someone bin Laden had fought alongside of during the war against the Soviets. They're not going to go after bin Laden. They're not going to kill bin Laden. They'll take our money, they'll shoot up some bullets. They're not going to destroy somebody they regard as a hero.
The Pentagon's senior commander disagreed.
We like the arrangements that we have with the opposition commanders with whom we have been working. And so we will intend, at this point, to continue to work with these opposition leaders.
America had a secret weapon.
Good evening.
Pakistan. Immediately after 9/11, the United States had requested assistance from Pakistan's President Musharraf, who had agreed to help with the war on terror. The US now asked its new friend to help at Tora Bora.
We were tasked to trace the Al-Qaeda terrorists and stop their entry into Pakistan.
Pakistan military moved up to positions high up in the mountains, and the hope was that these units would be able to capture any fighters who came through.
But covering hundreds of miles of the world's most treacherous border at high altitude was a formidable task.
USSR, with their resources, and they were unlimited resources, they could not seal this border.
You can't put people on the whole mountains. For that, you need armies of 2-3 countries, because you just can't plug every hole.
Worse, rumors soon began to circulate that the Afghan warlords were taking bribes to allow Al-Qaeda fighters to escape.
This country, has a history built on bartering, and the allegiances can be bought, and so we suspect that that has in fact been happening.
As time went by, the Pentagon realized that its hold on the warlords' allegiance was temporary, and that time was running out.
Once it went on for a day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days, and then a week, and then 10 days, I think with every passing day, we were pretty sure that they weren't going to be able to get him.
In mid-December, after a month of bombardment, Al-Qaeda's senior leaders finally slipped the net. US intelligence assumed they had crossed the border from Tora Bora directly south into Parachinar. Some did. Of those, many were captured. Recent evidence, however, suggests that the organization's senior leadership took a different route on their way into Pakistan, east.
سلیونیم سل کسانو ولا چې خې ضربه وسلې ورسره وي صاحب او خې ضربه وسلې ورسره وي ډېرو سره دا راکټې مو ډېرو سره ماشینې وي نو ډېر به داسې مو په دې لارو به دوړو موړو والي وو نو موږ ویل چې دا چېرته بس توره بوړه کې او راغلي زموږ کلي خلکو ویل لاړ شوې دا خل لا پورې بس نو هغه چې لاړو هغه خلک هم راپورې ایستله په ګاډو کې لاړل هغه هم ورپسې لاړ.
From the moment they crossed the Kabul River at Lalpur, Al-Qaeda and its senior leadership were lost to the Americans.
What is the latest thinking now about where bin Laden might be?
anybody's guess, is the latest thinking.
Entirely predictable, entirely predictable.
They ran into Pakistan, the Al-Qaeda and Taliban. They ran into the mountains and cities of Pakistan.
The perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks escaped, and the United States was left to rue the loss of its best opportunity to kill bin Laden yet.
It was a serious setback that bin Laden got across the border at Tora Bora. No question about it.
Bin Laden himself was left to gloat.
إذا كانت جميع قوى الشر العالمي لم تستطع أن تحقق مرادها على ميل مربع فكيف يمكن لهذه القوى الشريرة أن تنتصر على العالم الإسلامي؟
What happened to Al-Qaeda next is a matter of some speculation. Many fighters simply went home.
Others stayed along the border in Waziristan or the Northwest Frontier Province, where it's very, very difficult, in many cases impossible, for the U.S. to operate, or even for central government Pakistani forces to operate.
Once there, and once establishing themselves there, I think they began to realize that they were, if not completely beyond the reach of the government of Pakistan, that they had a relatively secure safe haven.
Instead of eliminating Al-Qaeda, the United States had pushed the organization out of reach. This was to cause serious problems later on. Osama bin Laden had taken on the greatest military force on earth and had survived to tell the tale.
تلك المعركة العظيمة التي انتصر فيها الإيمان على جميع القوى المادية لأهل الشر.
US intelligence was to suffer one final humiliating setback.
We heard the noise and we thought a car had exploded, this man says. When we went to find out what happened, and we found a man laying on the ground, we didn't know the reason.
In February 2002, unaware that it was under surveillance by the CIA, Yemeni authorities visited the Hada house. Ahmed al-Hada escaped. His son, Samir, cornered by Yemeni authorities, blew himself up with a hand grenade.
Hada house went down, we kind of lost our, we lost our ability to monitor what was going on and who was calling.
By the spring of 2002, Al-Qaeda was gone, and the CIA's main means of intercepting their communications was gone with them. The future for Osama bin Laden looked good. That was to change.